The annual meetings of the Afdb 2024 continues today here in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm standing in front of the exhibition center of the Afdb itself. Today we've had various sessions discussing a number of issues, but let me start by speaking to the issue of debt sustainability for Africa and this new framework that African government will need to put in place to ensure that debt becomes sustainable, tied to national development, and looking at countries such as Ethiopia currently holding discussions with the IMF.
In Ethiopia, for the last 15 years, we have borrowed both concessional and partly non-concessional. Most of our borrowing mix is concessional. We have invested on the railway, we have invested on the highway, we have invested on electricity generation, on transmission line. Also, we have invested on industrial capacity building, industrial parks and the others. So this critical infrastructure of transport, communication, industrial capacity is very important for our growth. So in a way, we have created a very usable asset that is very meaningful to use to generate growth. We need to do ease of doing business. We need to fix the macroeconomy so that the economy overall is suitable for external investment to attract FDI. That's what we are doing as part of our homegrown economic reform. Addressing the macro challenge, controlling inflation, restructuring debt so that it can be sustainable, as well as also enhancing the competitiveness of the economy and also to generate more export. So debt is part of the equation. It's not alone. It has to operate within all this real sector, monetary sector, fiscal and balance of payment as well. So responsible borrowing from our side is very important. We should focus on generating more growth, and export-oriented growth is very important, as well as also import substitutions. If we learn from our past mistakes and then we use these resources to generate growth in a sustainable financing manner.
Who is actually holding us to account? Who is holding ministers to finance to account when they say we are going to borrow for X? Where is the parliamentary oversight? Where's the robustness in our governance structures? So, for me, the first thing we need to do is to put those systems in place. If we can do it and we can implement it, okay, that's step number one. Step number two is, in my dream world, in 40 years' time, we would not just have borrowed, but we would have invested that borrowing wisely. And I can't remember whether it was Dr. Morsi who said it or Ambassador Muchanga. But if you look at debt effectiveness on the continent or debt investment effectiveness, it ranges from everything from 10% in Nigeria to 100% in Rwanda. So if you're borrowing and you're only spending 10% of that money effectively, what are you actually leaving for your children? Your children are going to pay for that debt someday, and your grandchildren, but you've only spent 10% of it effectively. So we should strive to ensure that we are all hovering around the 80 to 100% effective utilization of debt. That will be objective number 2. Objective number 3 is that we actually have, a network of African MDBs that are driving our agenda on the continent. And organizations like ALSF is actually funded by African governments. I was a bit surprised when you listed who was funding your booklets and your training, and I was like, why are we not funding these institutions if we really want them to be independent and drive our debt agenda? I'd like to see these institutions do that. I'd like us to have an African financial framework that has a liquidity sustainability framework that enables us to get over liquidity issues before they become a crisis for us. I'd like us to have an African financial framework that is effectively capitalized by our governments. And then, we all talk about debt as if it's a bad thing. Debt is not a bad thing. How many of us borrow? We all borrow. We all have mortgages. We've all borrowed for something. It's about what you spend the money on.
Now, one of the sessions today not open to the public or the press was the Governors' Dialogue. Finance ministers, central bank governors across Africa, including Nigeria, meeting behind closed doors to discuss the new way forward for Africa's financial architecture. And I caught up with Nigeria's central bank deputy governor, Muhammad Abdullahi, on that.
This morning, we took a very detailed presentation from the president of the bank, Mr. Adesina, who's also Nigerian, about the successes of the bank so far, the challenges of the global economy and how they affect Africa and countries like Nigeria, the outlook for the future, both for the region and for the Africa Development Bank, and what support is required to actually push through development and growth across the various countries in Africa.
Now, unlocking Africa's digital transformation via artificial intelligence were part of these sessions we covered. Today, there are discussions on how we can deepen these across the 54 countries on the African continent. But getting back to the financial marketplace, we need to do a whole lot more in ensuring that we sort out inflation, interest rate, exchange rate, the depreciation across local currencies on the continent, and that's what Oyewale Akeem spoke to me about.
I would like to see an opportunity for the conference to be able to deliberate on important issues such as the convertibility of our currencies, the African Free Trade Agreement, the PAPs, these are things that are limiting the growth and the connectiveness of African economies, especially the capital markets. You are not seeing a lot of investors in Nigeria invest in the Ghanaian market, in the South African market, and this should be something we should look at. If you're able to harness, the power of the capital market, we're able to integrate it as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, we're going to move to the next level. And this is extremely important for us because, as we were told last year at one of the sessions, Africa is still the continent that has the least trade going on across its borders. We trade more with Europeans, more with Americans, more with Asians than we trade amongst ourselves. We need to tackle that headlong. We need to use all the resources we have, financial resources, the capital markets, the money markets, and one of the limiting factors is that we have such an amount of multiple currencies that are not convertible. Let us address that, and I think we're going to move forward.
Now, we've seen a couple of cross-border banking business in Africa in recent years. Kenya's big names such as KCB Group, Equity Bank Group, making inroads into other East African regions, including DR Congo in Central Africa, Nigeria's Access Bank, and a few other names. Now, these are part of the conversation that's been had on how we can support this banking sector to provide further economic transformation, Philip, to the continent. Development finance institutions across Africa would also have to do a whole lot more, taking what you call the heavy liftings to support economic transformation on the continent, putting more funds in the hands of the private sector, providing the much needed help to governments as well to facilitate infrastructure and other critical spendings.
DBN last year, for example, were able to raise about 25 million euros from KFW, strictly for green finance. That was a major one we've done, looking at specialized areas. But beyond that, too, looking at our own business, too, we're able to disburse over 290 billion to financial institutions that partner with us for on-lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. But we believe there's a lot more to be done, and that's why we believe that reaching out to risk capital, both domestically and reaching out to international partners, will be very, very helpful.
The sun is beginning to set over Nairobi, the economic and financial capital of Kenya. It's time to get ready for tomorrow, the opening of the AFDB's annual summit, when presidents, heads of state, and other top government officials, including the host country, will be here at the KICC to formally declare the event open and go into presidential dialogue. We'll be covering all that for you here on our Rice News channel. I am Bosin Omofaye in Nairobi.